For centuries, the drum has been used as a powerful tool of conjuration for many cultures. Among the variations, the African drum stands out as the most iconic. Its signature sound and design has been deeply etched into history. Drums have played a central role in Africa, serving as instruments of communication, announcing war, celebration, and ceremony. However, despite their spiritual and communal significance, drums are notably absent from the Hoodoo tradition. In this episode, we explore why drums are not commonly used in the Hoodoo tradition, tracing their journey from Africa to the Americas, their banning, and how this has influenced the evolution of Hoodooism. Hey everyone, welcome back to Papa Seer's YouTube channel. If you love diving into captivating stories about Hoodoo history, Black American spirituality, and so much more, then you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel so you always know whenever I post a new video. I'll give you a moment right now to go ahead and hit like and also subscribe. It is me, Papa Seer, host, narrator, and storyteller of the #1 Hoodoo and spirituality based podcast, the Hoodoo and Chill podcast, and we are back today with another episode. As always, I am excited to be here, and this episode especially, I have been really anxious to put out to the world. And today, of course, I don't know why lately the episodes have been, these Mythbuster style episodes, or where we try to unlock a secret or uncover something that hasn't been translated properly in Hoodooism or Black American spirituality. And today I wanted to bring up the topic of why the drum, specifically the African drum, isn't used in Hoodooism. Now, before some of you pause this video and start attacking me in the comments, hear me out, okay? Because anyone with any real historical knowledge behind them when it comes to our practices know for a fact that drums were incorporated in the original way. And when I say the original way, I mean before it was coined or given the name Hoodooism, when these were traditions of many different variations from Central and West Africa. The drum was used and is still used to this day. Now, there is a reason why when you pick up a lot of books about Hoodooism, or when you listen to podcasts like this, or even other people talk about it, there are very rare, if any, instances when you hear people talk about drumming being utilized as a method of invocation or for any reason in Hoodooism. And then there are some of you that's probably saying, Papa Seer, I follow you on Instagram and I know for a fact that you use a drum. I've seen it. I've come to one of your events and I've heard you play your drum. Yes, I do use my drum, and I absolutely do incorporate my drum into my Hoodoo practice, which I'm going to talk about how and why I do that later on in the show today. But first, the first thing that we're going to talk about today, and I have broken this episode up into 5 beautiful talking points. We're going to talk about the history of the drum. We're going to talk about why the drum was banned in America, how it got to America, the African drum's connection to the Hoodoo practice. And then we're also going to talk about Hoodooism and the drum today. Is it appropriate to use it? Should you incorporate it in your practice? How should you do it? Who should be using it? The African drum made its way to the United States via the transatlantic slave trade. During the Middle Passage, slavers sought to maximize their profit by keeping enslaved Africans alive and physically active. A cruel practice known as dancing the slaves was enforced to promote blood circulation during long voyages. One of the earliest documented examples of African drums in America is an Akan drum from Ghana, discovered in Virginia in 1735. However, what is more significant is that enslaved Africans carried the knowledge of drum making within their hearts and minds, ensuring that the art of drum construction and the use survived beyond their initial arrival. So prior to the arrival of Africans via the transatlantic slave trade, the drum was an instrument that was extremely sacred. It was an instrument that was not only used for ritual and ceremonial purposes, but it was an instrument that had been incorporated into daily life in African culture. The first evidence that we have of the drum arriving here in the Americas, I break this down into two ways. The first way is the physical drum and its arrival. The actual physical drum, which was made and constructed in Africa, how did it get here? As I stated before, there was this cruel, very cruel, demoralizing practice on slave ships, and it was called the dancing of the slaves. And the reason why they would do this is because most of the time during the voyage from Africa to the Americas, it would take months. And as we know, the African people were stored as cargo under the ships, and they weren't moving around for the majority of the time, which is horrible on the body. It's bad for your muscles when you don't move. For extended periods of time, you won't be able to use your muscles properly. So what they would do is sometimes daily, bring them out from under the ship, and they would bring them on board, allow them to get some fresh air, spray them down with water sometimes, and they would usually make someone drum or play an instrument and make the slaves move around so they could get some movement and blood circulation to their muscles. So the physical drum arrived in the Americas through an extremely traumatic practice. I'm proud to be from Virginia every single time I have to do one of these podcasts, because the oldest surviving drum, again, that we do have here in the Americas was found in Virginia. It did come from Ghana, and the belief is that this was a drum utilized on a slave ship for the horrible practice of dancing the slaves. The second aspect of this that I feel more personally connected to is the rhythms, the patterns, the construction, the dance movements incorporated with the drum beats, the patterns for war, for farming. All of this was stored in the hearts, in the minds of the people who arrived here in the Americas. They didn't forget those rhythms. They didn't forget those beats that came with them. And you come into this land that is different from your homeland, but then there are still materials that you can use to duplicate or replicate something that you would have had back at home. So upon arrival, before slavery became so political, the early Africans had a bit more freedoms to preserve some of their culture that they brought with them over here. One of the examples of this would have been the construction of drums here in the Americas. As a matter of fact, the drum that was found in Virginia, the frame came from wood in Africa, but the hide from the drum head, it was from a material that was found in North America. So that lets us know that the drums were still being used here in the Americas. This is important because we see evidence of the African, specifically the African drum, being utilized in the Americas as early as 1689. I would like to read you all a short excerpt from a man named Sir Hans Sloane, who was stationed in Jamaica in 1689. And this is an excerpt from his observation of the enslaved African people who were on the island of Jamaica during this time. Again, this is in 1689. And I quote, "The Negroes, formerly on their festivals, were allowed the use of trumpets after their fashion, and drums made of a piece of a hollow tree, covered one end with any green skin, and stretched with pins. Been making use of these in their wars at home in Africa, it was thought too much enticing them to rebellion, and so they were prohibited by the customs of the island." The African drum has always had a double-edged sword since its arrival in America. On one end, it was used by colonizers and slave owners as a tool of subjugation. It was used as a tool of degradation. They took something that was very sacred to their culture and their customs and turned it around and used it as a way to control or even give them what I like to call a sweet nothing. I'm going to give you a little piece of freedom. We're going to allow you all to drum and to sing and to dance so you can form some version of false melancholy so you won't be enticed to rebel or you won't hate your life so much. This was one thought. Now, on the other end of that, the colonizers and the slave owners, they hated the drum because it represented something that stirred up a force, a power, something that could not be tamed in the enslaved African people at that time. It represented freedom. It was something that when the beats, the rhythms, the patting of the drum, the movements, it was almost as if they were no longer in chains and they were coming back to themselves and remembering pieces of their homeland. And so we see here, before it was formally banned and politicized, they politicized the banning of the African drum as far back as 1689. Colonizers were skeptical of the power that it held. They were aware of also its spiritual influence because there are many books penned by slave owners specifically about the traditions, the customs of many ATRs in Africa from their own experience. So they were not ignorant to the fact that these drums were also used to invoke the power of the old African gods. We move forward with our second talking point, and that is, why was the drum or the banning of the drum in the Americas? From the moment of its arrival in the Americas, the African drum was met with suspicion. It was both a tool of subjugation used to entertain enslaved Africans and a tool of resistance. European colonists feared the drum, recognizing its role in communication and war strategies in Africa. As early as the 1600s, laws were enacted to restrict the use of drums among enslaved Africans. The fear was that the drums could be used to incite rebellion and coordinate uprisings. The most pivotal moment came with the Stono Rebellion of 1739, the largest slave uprising of the South Carolina colonial era. Led by Jimmy, an enslaved man believed to be from the Kingdom of Congo, the rebellion saw African warriors march from South Carolina towards Spanish Florida, loudly beating drums and playing war instruments traditional to the Congo. The revolt's ferocity cemented the colonists' fears, leading to the official banning of African drums in 1740. The 1740 Slave Code explicitly prohibited enslaved people from carrying drums, horns, or other loud instruments, fearing they could be used to signal uprisings. Despite the legal prohibitions, drums reemerged in acts of defiance, most notably during the 1811 revolt on the German coast in Louisiana, where African war drums were once again used in an attempted revolution. So I've talked about the Stono Rebellion before in my short documentary that I did on the Fort Negro massacre. And as a matter of fact, I'm gonna leave a link to that video about the Fort Negro massacre. Really good video. And I actually have a small portion in there where I do talk more in depth about the Stono Rebellion. Note to self, Papa Seer, you probably should put out a video about the Stono Rebellion because there aren't too many. But let's talk about it for a moment. This is the moment that kind of solidifies in North America when drumming, specifically the drum, is banned from the plantations. The year is 1739, and a slave from the Congo by the name of Jimmy leads this rebellion. And what is most notable about this rebellion, it's not so much that they rebelled. I mean, it's 1740. Slaves had tried to rebel before. This is not the first time that the Africans had an attempt of resistance. What was different about this particular instance was that the drums, the war instruments, incited the violence. The drumming and these instruments that they played as they marched in this attempted march from South Carolina to Florida, it incited others to join their army. It incited others to revolt. This is really truly what scared them, because when you think about it at this time, it wouldn't have been uncommon to find an African drum on a slave plantation prior to the Stono Rebellion. It wouldn't have been uncommon to hear the African drums on slave plantations. It wouldn't have been uncommon that this instrument would have been used during times of festivals. It wouldn't even have been uncommon for the slave owners to be entertained by listening or watching the Africans or the enslaved Africans perform with these African drums. But after this incident, the drumming and the banning of it becomes politicized, because we also know that this isn't the first time that the drum had been banned. The drum had been banned technically since the 1600s, but it was not politicized, meaning that it did not go into written law. It did not stir so much fear in white America that they had to put this on law, that if we allow these people to have any piece of something that reconnects them to their homeland, they will revolt. And not only will they revolt, they will win. Even without the playing of the drum, it did what it's supposed to do. The purpose of a war drum is to incite fear into the enemy. It is to incite fear that when you hear these drums coming, we are coming, and we are coming for war. Just imagine the fear that was instilled, that was literally ingrained in white America from the beating of drums. Given the rich spiritual tradition of Hoodoo, it may seem surprising that drums are not a central component of its practice. The banning of the drum forced Black Americans to adapt their spiritual expressions, leading to the rise of alternative instruments such as the tambourine, bones, the banjo, and the fiddle. Unlike in traditions such as Vodou, where drums remained integral, Hoodoo evolved under the pressure of restriction, emphasizing other sonic and rhythmic methods of spiritual practice. In hoodoo, rhythm and sound are still deeply significant, but they may manifest in different forms. Hand clapping, foot stomping, and call and response singing became primary ways to conjure spirit, replacing the drum's presence. The power of vibration, an essential aspect of hoodoo, was not lost. It simply transformed. At this point of the show, I think it is very important right now to isolate and separate New Orleans, because someone in the audience right now is saying, Papa Seer, we use the drum in New Orleans. And I'm going to nod my head and agree with you. And I'm going to separate and I'm going to isolate New Orleans. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the culture of New Orleans, Vodou, which is derivative of Haitian and African Vodou, where the drum is used heavily and plays a very important role for ritual, that part never really died out. And we have evidence of that just going back to the wonderful and the fabulous Marie Laveau, where she is known to be not only a voodoo priestess, but also a hoodoo practitioner as well. And in her ceremonies in Conjure Square, the drum was used. They kept that alive. She was able to use her notoriety and her connections in the New Orleans community to keep that alive. Her and Dr. John, as a matter of fact, there is evidence of where she would even pay her teacher, Dr. John, to come to her ceremonies, and he would be the one that would actually play the drum. So again, we have to separate New Orleans, and I think it's important, for anybody when we're talking about these, spirituality, hoodooism, voodooism, that New Orleans has to remain separate when it comes to spirituality. New Orleans is like its own thing. It's like its own separate entity, and it is important, in my opinion, when you talk about this, to make that distinction. Now, back to this as a whole, hoodooism and the connection of the drum as a whole. Putting New Orleans, we love you, but we're gonna put you to the side now. We're gonna talk about the rest of the American South, okay, where the voodoo culture isn't as prevalent, or it doesn't necessarily exist at all. What happens when the drum is taken away? Before I even did this podcast, because I didn't want to come on here and just talk about things that I knew off the top of my head. I don't encourage anyone to do so. I always encourage you to fact check what you know or even challenge it. So I went through all of Hyatt's work, that long compendium of hoodoo conjuration, and all of those interviews and all of those workings. That's extremely long. I could not find literally one reference to drums. Nothing at all. And of course, then I went back to Zora just to fact check her a little bit. I always love Zora. I went into Hoodoo in America, and she breaks it down briefly and talks about, when they're talking about the hoodoo dance, that they didn't use drums during the hoodoo dance. And if those of you who haven't seen my video on the hoodoo dance, I will also leave a link for that too, because I talked about that as well in that documentary, that even during the hoodoo dance, the drum was not used, but hand clapping, foot patting, tambourines, things that could shake or rattle were substituted for the drum. And why is that important during this time? Because we're out of the days of slavery, we're out of the 1800s, and now I'm talking about the era of the early 1900s. Well, I would like to use the word rebanning. The drum was rebanned again, or given an additional layer of being politicized, right? Because in the 1920s and in the early 1800s, all Black American spiritual traditions that were not derivative of the Christian church, it was illegal to practice hoodooism, voodooism, any ATR, anything like that. It would have been illegal. And as we know, that the African drum is parallel to these traditions. So what I'm saying is that in the 1920s, when they made this law that it was illegal to practice Black American spirituality, we lost the drum again. Even if it had an opportunity to come back, we lost it again. And so what do we do, and what is hoodooism all about? It's about being adaptable. It's about adapting to the environment. It's about utilizing what God has given you. And that is something that I think, we don't talk enough about in hoodooism, about the humility and the humble spirit that is aligned with the hoodoo practitioner, where we don't necessarily seek for more. We look around and we see the divinity, we see the sacredness in the objects, in the things that are surrounding us. And as my hoodoo mother always told me, you don't have to go purchase anything. You always have what you need. Just look around the house. You see, most of you are spending way too money on this practice because you haven't formed a love relationship with just the things in your home, or just being more observant about what can be utilized for the work that I'm going to do. So, not to go on a tangent, this is just what we do as Black people. You take one thing away from us and we replace it with something else. And I was talking about this earlier today, and I said to a colleague of mine, I said, even though the drum was taken away, those rhythms, and it's because it's not so much about the tool, even though the tool itself, the physical tool, has its power. It's about the vibration that emits from the drum, the sound, the rhythm, the pattern. Because these tools had been etched into our DNA for so many centuries, even to this day, Black Americans have not lost the connection to the African drum. You can see it in the way that we dance, in our music, in our style of worship. It is very prevalent in the Black American church, especially in the South, that this narrative that we don't know who we are, or we're so out of touch of who we are. I don't believe that is true. I believe that it is translated in a different way. And that's beautiful. Because what do we know about our loving God? God is diverse. The absence of drums in hoodoo is a direct consequence of their suppression during slavery. While other African-derived traditions maintain their percussive elements, hoodoo, being a folk practice shaped by the constraints of American slavery and segregation, adapted through different means. The rhythmic power of the drum was transferred into the vocal and physical movements of the practitioner. Additionally, hoodoo, unlike voodoo, does not operate as an organized religion with large-scale ritual gatherings. Instead, it is deeply personal and often solitary. The need for drumming as a communal experience was less pronounced, leading to its diminished role over time. Although drums do not play a dominant role in hoodoo, their echoes can still be felt in the rhythms of our spiritual work. The beat of a foot tapping on a wooden floor, the steady clapping in a prayer circle, and the rhythmic intonations of a sermon all carry the ancestral memory of the drum. Some modern practitioners have begun to reintroduce drums into their work, reclaiming the lost elements of African spiritual practices. Hoodoo is ever evolving, and while it has historically thrived without drums, there is always space for practitioners to explore new and old ways of calling spirit, whether through the pulse of tambourine, the cadence of a spiritual song, or the subtle heartbeat of a drum. The essence of rhythm remains deeply woven into all of our traditions. The main demographic for this podcast is the millennial practitioner. And so I look to you all as the modern practitioner, the new blood in today's day and age. And I am a voice, one of the voices of our generation. And I continually to encourage you all and to find more faith and confidence into what you are doing as a modern practitioner. And I say all of that to say is that we have to embrace the freedoms that we do have. And I truly believe that spirit, our ancestors, are teaching us or reteaching us or helping or utilizing us as modern practitioners to resurface elements of our culture, of our traditions, of our practices that have been lost or that were restricted from us. You do not have to utilize a drum for your hoodoo journey to be effective and for it to be powerful and for it to provide the experience that you are seeking or that is ordained to you. But then I also tip my hat and I nod and I smile to those of you that feel compelled to drum, that feel compelled that this is a part of who I am, this is in my DNA, and I want to reintroduce this into my work. For those of you that keep drums, I keep, African drums near my altar. For those of you who have ancestral drums, I went, I purchased an ancestral drum from Ghana House, or is it the Africa House? Ghana House or the Africa House, don't quote me, but it's in Richmond, Virginia, right on Broad Street. And, I love the owner. I've been friends with her for many years. Her name is Queen. And I just remember going in there one day. I don't even know why I was visiting Richmond and walked in there just to see her. And she was like, Seer, I want you to see these new drums that just came in for me. And I was asking, I said, I think I'm supposed to buy one of these. And she said, well, you need a small one. That's for your ancestors. You don't need a big one to play for your ancestors. And I didn't know that, so that, just some wisdom that was shared to me from someone that's very special to me. And she's from Ghana. So if those of you that feel compelled to, this is something you want to add into your work, I'm by all means, and I behoove you to do so. I'm not going to lie to you now. There are some people who feel a way about women playing drums. There are some that will say that it's not traditional in certain cultures for women to play drums. And that is true. Certain cultures. I'm not here to say what anyone can or cannot do just to protect you, because those of you that listen to me, I have love for you. So I just would say that everything that you do is not for everyone. If you want to drum for your ancestors, if you want to drum, doing your ritual hoodoo work, do you, by all means. But everyone doesn't have to know. You don't need to be taking pictures of your altar, because there's always going to be someone who's going to critique you and going to make you question something. And if it feels right for you, then you go for it. At the end of the day, the only person you really have to answer to is your God and your ancestors. And that's between you and them. I'm not the judge and the jury of that. Okay. The drum, a powerful force in African spiritual and communal life, was systematically stripped from enslaved Africans in America. Hoodoo, shaped by the conditions of survival and adaptation, found new ways to harness spiritual sound and rhythm. While the drum itself may be absent, its powers live on in the heartbeat of the hoodoo practice. As we continue to explore our spiritual heritage, we must remember that the essence of the drum is not lost. It is simply waiting to be reclaimed. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Hoodoo and Chill podcast, and be sure to follow us for more deep dives into the rich traditions of Black American spirituality. Until next time, family, friends, listeners, supporters, I send you all out in love, light, peace, prosperity, protection. I bless you from the top of your head to your soles of your feet. You're coming and you're going. May your hands be like gold. May everything that you touch materialize as if it were gold. And with that, my people, I release you into the atmosphere. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, then give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends in respective communities. I'd love to hear your thoughts, So let's get the conversation started in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to Papa Seer for more intriguing stories from Hoodoo history, and I'll see you in the next video.